So it's not today that we see this polarization. This has been a point of journalism for a long time. Like, this has been a huge ongoing debate since journalism ever was a thing. We know that there's a political spectrum. This one end is the extreme left and one end is the extreme right, and we're all pretty well versed about it, especially in the last 4 years. But essentially what is causing this polarization in the electorate is because of what we see on the media. Now, I'm a mass media student, right? So what we study, the first thing that we study in mass media is that media controls everything. Whoever you think you are, whatever you think you're capable of, whatever you think you make, whatever decisions you do, you're not making those decisions. The media is telling you to do, and this is essentially what we were taught. And this also has its effects on politics, especially because for any hard working class voter, their main way of getting any news on politics would be the media. Who reports the truth to you is the media, which is us. Now, what you see or what you understand of the truth is what we are telling you. And depending on where we stand on the political spectrum, that sort of colors the truth or our representation of the truth. So, a little segue here is that you should never trust anything that you read on any kind of media. Like I said, the media decides and they tell you what to think and what to believe, what you understand of the truth. And this has been a long formed theory which we call as the agenda setting function of the media. Now, this was first heard of in 1963. A US politician, Bernard Cohen, who was a Democrat, he had made this very famous statement which pretty much sums up the agenda setting function. And he said that, quote, "The press may not be successful much of the time in telling people what to think, but it is stunningly successful in telling its readers what to think about. The world will look different to a different type of people depending on the map that is drawn for them by writers, editors and publishers of the paper they read." Now, this was in 1963. Eventually, there was a lot of empirical research done, a lot of data, information collected, which led to the formation of what we now call, media theorists call, agenda setting theory. What the theory essentially says is that the stories, the news, the truth that receives the most attention from the media will receive the most attention from the public. So, for example, since it's a small channel and not many people are going to see this, and we probably will not be arrested for this, recently we had this terror accused Sadhvi Pragya Thakur. Now, she was taken in by the BJP and she's now contesting elections. Now, of course, because she is implicated in an ongoing case, she's not been acquitted yet by any of the law enforcement agencies. It is a wrong move. I mean, kind of obvious there. Now, I read 3 papers. So you take the Indian Express, you take the Times of India, and you take Hindustan Times. Both Times of India and the Indian Express chose to run with the story as their headline, like their major story that was, their front page story. For HT, the story was on the front page, but it was this tiny little box in some corner. It was expounded on later, but it was way behind. And so when you read the HT, you as the reader will think that maybe it's not that big of a deal. You will think that the page that has the most space up on the front page is the story, is the, what is really wrong or right with the world or all of that. So now why HT did what they did is a whole other thing, but yeah, so editors decide what goes and what doesn't on the front page, and then that affects your understanding of the world, so to speak. Different media have different ideological stands, and if anybody tells you they're objective, they're not. Don't think so, especially times now. They all have their ideological stands. Now, that ideology can be influenced by their personal motivations, like their personal personally what they identify with any left or right-wing ideologies, or maybe money or power or people higher up who forcing them to show certain things or not. But every media organization will have a certain editorial policy which decides, what really they would say is important or what isn't. Now, most media organizations throughout the world, not just India, they will not explicitly state that. It is now being suggested that journalists state what their biases are, where they're coming from, but that's still a very small voice. Nobody is really listening to that. The larger understanding of what a journalist is that he or she should be objective, which is not going to happen. But yeah, now because nobody really says it out loud, you think that what they're telling is the objective truth, depending on what channel, whether you watch Times Now or whether you watch NDTV. Your opinions, your beliefs, your understanding of the world, of politics, of the state of affairs will differ. And this is essentially largely what the agenda setting theory decides to capture. If you want a little bit of history on that, we first came across this idea in a book in 1922. Walton Lippman was a media theorist, a very famous media theorist. Our department worships it, him. But he had a book called Public Opinion, groundbreaking, earth-shattering book. Everybody read it. In which the first chapter is titled "The World Outside and the Pictures in Our Heads." It's essentially what he was saying, that there's a certain world outside, but we have completely different pictures in our heads. This is pretty similar to what Plato talked about in his allegory of a cave. If to Walter Lippmann, what he's trying to say is that there's a certain reality, a certain truth that nobody really knows, or very few people know, but that voice doesn't really come out in the open. And we're living lies. Yeah, we're living in bubbles. We are the people looking at the back of the cave, tied with chains, not knowing that there's this in the world outside, with the truth that is actually outside, and we just need to free ourselves. But yeah, that doesn't happen. Moving on. This theory, coming back to that, was later formally introduced in 1972 in a paper which is titled "The Agenda Setting Function," which is where we get the name from, by two people, Maxwell McCombs and Donald Shaw. Now, in the paper, they studied voters in this place in North Carolina called Chapel Hill during the 1968 US presidential election. And they studied voters over a period of time, essentially trying to understand how the media that they consumed affected their voting decisions, affected their beliefs, how it varied over a period of time. And what they stated was that, quote, "What we know of the world is largely based on what the media decide to tell us. The priorities of the media strongly influences the priorities of the public," unquote. This study, it disrupted the field of the media, and there was a lot of different similar studies conducted around the globe. Now, like I said, what this theory states is that the issues that gain prominence in media are the issues that gain prominence in public discourse, which eventually affect the public as electorate, as voters. And that is how, it literally sets the future of the world. But that, however, is just the first level on which the media operates. In their paper, McCombs and Shaw stated that there are two different levels in which agenda setting function works. First is that they decide which stories go on the top, which are the burning issues of the public, and the second is the media also decide what you think or how you think about those issues. So I've recently joined Twitter. Now, the whole Sadhvi Pragya thing, there's a section of people who are completely, crazy about it. How is she there? She should not be, this and that. And they can get pretty outrageous. Then there's this whole another section of people who are like, she has been acquitted, this and that. There's no proof. She, honestly speaking, the court has said there's not strong evidence. And she has, I shouldn't call her Sadhvi, Pragya Thakur herself has made very strong statements of how she was tortured and how she cursed Hemant Karkare, who was a martyr in the 26/11 attacks, and how she cursed him, that's why he died. Now, especially with all of her statements, is that as far as journalism's viewpoint is concerned, it's important that if a public figure makes a statement like that, you put it out. What makes it, what's very crucial or very fragile here is the way you portray it. Because if you just portray it, if you just state it out, there's a risk that the public might lose, what it actually means. So journalists have to put it in context. When you put it in context, the kind of context you choose, or whatever journalists choose, differs for different journalists, which is essentially what happens. Some would give an accompanying explanation of who Hemant Karkare was and what he did and all of that. Some would choose to not put that out there. So when you read that statement and then you realize he died in 26/11, which is a huge emotional thing for at least Mumbaikars, you have a completely different understanding of what happened. If you just read the statement and you're like, oh, was she tortured, oh, this and that, then you have a completely different viewpoint. And so essentially this is agenda setting.